Welcome to the podcast Running Toward. This podcast tells stories of ordinary people who couldn't look away once they saw the hidden crisis in foster care and the families impacted. Our guests share heartbreak that led them to take reluctant and unexpected small, faithful steps toward the most vulnerable in their communities. Not because they had a plan, and not because they felt ready, but because they couldn't unsee their pain. You'll hear how people living normal lives discover that getting closer changed them. Their comfort mattered less, their grip on uncertainty faded, and their faith got feet in quiet, everyday ways. Ending the crisis for one or for all isn't a quick fix. It's a long, slow, often messy journey alongside one of the most overlooked and misunderstood groups in our community. Running Toward gives you a front row seat to the hidden crisis in foster care and the families impacted, and to the ordinary people who choose not to look away. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again. So today's episode is with my friends Mike and Ariel Kraft. And today isn't necessarily about discovering foster care, but today we're going to talk about Mike's journey first, and then we'll dive into Ariel's. But Mike was already a pastor when they became aware and started doing things in this space, and he kind of already knew about vulnerable children and had other church leaders and friends in his life that had been a part of this or experienced some part of this crisis. But that really changed for both of them when this crisis entered their own home. And what he experienced on the couch as a dad in his own home kind of exposed the gap that was in the pulpit where he spent most of his Sundays and a lot of his weeks. And he realized that the church, though they deeply cared, they were completely unprepared to serve in this space. And so this is a story not really about solutions, but more about just a response to what they felt in their heart, what they experienced in their home, and then bled all over into what they were doing through their daily lives and their jobs and their careers. So thank you, Mike and Ariel, for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Mike, let's dive in first. So before foster care touched your family, how did the foster crisis exist in your world as a pastor?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about my journey in life and with foster care, I grew up actually as a pastor's kid. And so the church that I grew up in was in Illinois, and it was a medium-sized church, probably like 600 or 700 people. And some people had fostered. I think we had maybe 2 foster families in the 25 years that I was connected with that church. And then when I became a pastor, we went to a church in Connecticut, and there was a church for about 700 people. And there was one foster family that we knew of, and they had a lot of issues that they were struggling with, and ended up actually even getting divorced. And so my connotation and my personal connection with foster care as tied to a local church was just maybe a family does it, but it's not really connected to the mission of the church. Right. And so when we planted our church and began to connect in the community and learn about the needs, and began to learn, like in San Antonio, oh my goodness, there's all these kids that need families and need homes. Like we really should do something about that. But I really didn't have a frame of reference for what that looked like in a healthy way. Yeah. And we didn't know what really to do. Ariel and I were very passionate about children and child advocacy. We had adopted our daughter from Uganda. But my primary thought about kids that were in crisis or vulnerable children and the orphan was overseas.
Yeah.
Not, hey, there's an issue right in our own backyard that we need to take care of. And so when we planted our church, I guess I really didn't have a frame of reference for what does this look like to be part of our mission.
Yeah. So in that season, where did you assume that responsibility for these vulnerable kids landed? I mean, there was a church kind of talked about the kids that were across the ocean, but where did you assume that responsibility for these kids that were vulnerable in our backyards, in our neighborhoods? Where did that land?
I think for me, first of all, the credit to the Holy Spirit of just kind of softening our hearts. Like, you did not have to sell Ariel and I on the importance of children. But when we started to learn that, hey, there are kids that are literally being sent on buses because there's no homes in our city. And I'm driving by and I'm seeing all of these churches, and I'm pastoring a congregation of people, and we're not doing anything to welcome these kids. It was like, hey, we have to do something. Yeah. And
what I think, to answer your question in terms of like, where did we think that responsibility lied? I think we would have both said that we thought it lied with the church,
Mm-hmm.
but practically speaking, we weren't really seeing that happen well, like
Right.
around us, that not to sound too critical. So I don't really know what we would have practically answered at the time. We probably would have said the church, but like really it was, I don't know, like the government. I don't know, people. I don't know, it's just happening. I don't know.
No,
Yeah, no, and no pastor that I'd talk with, and I was in the same boat. Nobody's going to say, hey, this isn't important or this isn't something we should do something about. But I think it's like, oh, yeah, well, we have child protective services. That's something that somebody else is addressing.
Right.
Not, hey, this is ownership of us. And I think when we started to learn, like, hey, we're not owning this collectively as the people of God, we really need to do something. We had a conversation to say, hey, we should become a foster family. I actually had people in our church leadership that were part of our advisory team that sat me down and said, hey, you really shouldn't be doing this. You need to focus on pastoring.
Right.
And I understand that there were a lot of things going on. But it was like, hey, somebody else will take care of that children. You have other things to do.
Right.
It's like, but nobody else is.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, I know from our journey too, it was one of those, like, growing up in church, you guys have been in church most of your life. It wasn't a intentional neglectfulness. It was just like, I don't even know where to, I don't know where to put this context. Like, okay, there are nonprofits that do it. Oh, the government's obviously stepped in. But what is the role of the church or the role of Christians? And yet also early on, when we started this 20 years ago, the state was actively giving the church the Heisman of like, no, church stay in your lane, government stays in its lane, which ultimately left kids in this valley where nobody was actually serving them because nobody kind of knew what their role was or what they could do or should do or even would do.
Yeah, for sure.
So now looking back on that season and looking forward to where you are now, what do you believe like a healthy church should be doing in this space? Even if it's not explicitly said in the Bible, Jesus never said the church should take care of kids in foster care, but obviously we can glean from the Gospels that this is intimately a part of his heart and intimately a part of who is part of his time and ministry on earth. So what do you believe a healthy church should be doing in this space?
Yeah, that is a great question. And ultimately, I mean, I believe that a healthy church should be caring for the most vulnerable because this is who Jesus is. This is what he did. I mean, he cared for the least, the last, and the lost. And you mentioned something at the beginning that I was a pastor, and I I just quickly want to just say this, like, what is ultimately the role of the pastor? And in our context, a lot of times people may think like, oh, the pastor is the one that preaches at church on Sunday. His role is to prepare a sermon. His role is to kind of take care, cast vision in the church. And those things are part of the pastor's responsibility. But ultimately, a pastor is a shepherd. And we are helping to lead an under shepherd, under Jesus, who is the good and the great shepherd. And we follow his leading and we lead people to him and help make disciples. And the best thing that we can do for people is help them follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And it's not, hey, I'm going to get up and be super eloquent. Hey, but it's to help people create pathways to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, and we're going to get into some specifics of how this reached my couch in a minute, I'm sure. But for me, when I have engaged on a personal level with the most vulnerable, it has led me to the presence of Jesus and a greater dependence upon Jesus far more than anything else in my life.
Yeah.
And so what should a church be doing? I think ultimately follow Jesus into caring for those that he cares about.
Exactly. So now let's dive into, like you alluded to, the more personal on your couch. So you're a pastor of a local church, but also you're leading your family. You're a father, you're a husband. And so when foster care entered your home, what did you experience as a dad that you had maybe never experienced as a pastor? How did that, you have the theological lens, but now you've got the lens of this is on my couch. This is lives that I'm stewarding, I'm pouring into.
Yeah. And what's wild is when you have biological children, you kind of feel like you own them, even though ultimately, like, we know that our children belong to the Lord anyways, and we steward our kids and parenting's hard. But I remember the first time we had a placement actually come. We went through like all of the intrusive, studies and home studies and trainings and everything. And then we have a kid show up. I was actually on a mission trip in Houston doing some hurricane relief. We get the phone call, hey, do you want to have this kid come? He shows up. Ariel's there with the kids. And then I come back and I'm exhausted, had been doing all of this stuff for hurricane relief. And there was this kid had super shaggy long hair at our house. We had no idea, like, did he speak Spanish? Did he speak English? What was the situation? What was going on with him? Had no clue. And he was actually asleep. She had put him in bed, and I go and I peer at, I go in the room and I open the door and I just look in, and she's like, do not wake him up. We got him down. Don't mess with him. Don't wake him up. I swear, Michael, but I wanted to see him and just pray over him, and looking at him it was honestly one of the most surreal feelings of my life, having no idea who in the heck this child was. Mm-hmm. And what had he been through? What kind of trauma? What was his family like? Who were his parents? I had no idea. And here he was in my house, and I was going to play the role of his dad. It was just the most bizarre thing. And guess what? No seminary class taught me how to do that. No, nobody had taught me how to do that except me going, okay, Jesus, I'm going to trust that you have orchestrated all of this, and I'm going to cling to you like never before. And the next day he woke up and we had breakfast, and we ended up playing with toys and took him to a party that we were supposed to go to. And we ended up having that little guy in our home for 6 months. And he started calling me dad, and we had a great bond, and I ended up connecting with his father, and they came to our church, and it was just like the most crazy thing, but realizing like, hey, I'm not prepared for this, and it's okay because I'm called, and the Lord's gonna take care of me. And we say things like, I would say things all the time from the pulpit, or we didn't really use a pulpit, but in front of our church, right? Fancy table in front of our church, say, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And hey guys, if he's called you, he's gonna equip you, and he's gonna prepare. But then when I'm going, oh my gosh, I've got this kid and I don't know anything about him, and he just flipped out and threw his Legos down the stairs and is going berserk, and it's like, okay, well, Michael, what Jesus is going to take care of. Not feeling real equipped right now. Exactly. I'm not really equipped right now. And like, wow, but he is enough, and he's sufficient, and he is working it all out. And so that was kind of the first time we ever had a placement. And then after he had left, it was just this crazy story, but we were talking to our agency about the next placement, and they had come over to kind of do a walkthrough of our home. And they were sitting down at our table. We were about to sign the documents, and they said, hey, we just got a call. We were relicensing with a different agency. And they said, hey, we just got a little notification that there's 2 little boys. And do you want them? Because if they don't come here, they're going to go to a shelter. And Ariel looks at me and is like, over my dead body are these boys going to a shelter? And I said, well, how long do we have to decide if we're going to take them? And he said, well, you got about 15 seconds. Mm-hmm. And next thing we knew, we were on our way to the hospital and took in this newborn who was withdrawing from drugs, and his 16-month-old brother who'd been through God knows what. And now almost 8 years later, 7.5 years later, they're our sons, our adopted sons. So it's the most crazy thing. And I think we all say, and especially I'm just going to be honest, as pastors, as people, we like to be in control. But as pastors, we like to be in control. What's going to happen in our church? Is this, like, we don't like it when there's a lot of variables that we can't control, like in our services, in our congregation, and in our own lives. And when you open yourself up to this space, you are not in control. But isn't that the ultimate goal?
Well, you're never really in control anyway.
Exactly. We have illusions of control.
For sure.
But isn't that the ultimate goal, is this surrender?
Right.
And so are we going to choose to put ourselves in positions where we have to surrender?
Right.
And I think that's the biggest question, is are we going to choose to put ourselves intentionally in positions that we don't have control of?
Yeah. Because ultimately, in a lot of areas, that illusion of control is very strong, because we can craft a life that is comfortable, that is easy. And in general, in America, we can, minus a few huge bumps along the road, we can kind of craft that. I know that was my experience too. And one of the pieces of that was then having this big brother in my life, the system in my life as a foster parent. You guys experienced that. It was awesome. Great people in the system, but the system as a whole, very much challenging. So what surprised you the most about the system, the foster care system, once you were inside of it?
The depth of brokenness and just the absolute complete dysfunction. not just of the system, but of the families and those that were in the system. And I mean, I think wading through the swamps of the dysfunction surprised me the most. And when you begin to realize like some of this, the generational cycles of brokenness, and the mom of these boys, she was impacted by foster care when she was a kid, and her mother, she was raised by a single mother and never knew her father, or, the placement that we have now. I mean, when you begin to know all of those things and understand all the depth of the layers of the dysfunction, the brokenness, it is incredibly messy. And then when you see the fact that, look, the government, this is not a problem the government is able to solve or was ever intended for the government to solve.
Right.
The bottom, I mean, the underlying issue in all of this is it really is a spiritual battle. And who is positioned to fight a spiritual battle but the people of God who are filled with the Holy Spirit? And so I think that's something that I've really been convicted about a lot lately is the fact that this ultimately is a spiritual battle and an issue. And so therefore the church are the only ones that are able and equipped to be able to respond to it.
So as a pastor and, seminary trained pastor, a lot of training leadership poured into you. What were some of the emotions that surfaced that none of that pastoral training trained you for? The generational trauma, the cycles, the brokenness that you brought into your home, the realization that you got this little guy who you don't know his story, you don't know what he's been through, you don't know anything about him. What were those emotions that surfaced that none of that pastoral training prepared you for in the least?
To start on a personal level, foster care has humbled me more than anything else that I've ever done in my life. And all of us say that we want to be humble. Like if you asked me, if you said, Mike, do you want to be? Yeah, for sure. I want to be humble. Jesus is humble. Like he was a humble servant. Philippians 2. I get that. But we don't like being humbled.
Correct.
And so going through this process and having people in my home and checking the temperature of the food in my refrigerator and looking at my bank statements and talking about our marriage. And we had one person ask about us, our sex life and, like all of these things, like, and I'm going, wait a minute, like, what? Like I get up out of my business. And so I was humbled. But then it honestly, it made me ask, like, what are we doing here? Like, what am I doing? Who am I actually following? And when I get into the depth of all of this and realize that, man, like I'm not prepared maybe the way that I thought that I would. It was a shot to my pride, but I think that was a good thing. Yeah. And then it honestly, it produced an anger in me for a little while. And there was a time where I probably was a little more jaded than I wanted to be, which the Lord had to humble me again and be like, Michael, you really need to get the plank out of your own eye before you start looking at the speck in other people's. But then I think that should be a righteous anger for the fact that, hey, there are all of these children and we, in a large sense, are not engaged the way that we should be.
Yeah. So on that same kind of thread, how has being a foster dad, you've got your seminary training, you've led a church, you've adopted internationally, now you're a foster dad. How has that living that out in your own life changed the way that you talk about foster care in the church?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it is part of my identity is that we are a family that cares for broken children, or like for children from hard places and vulnerable children, and welcome them into our home. And so it really just flows out of everything that I do. Like all of my stories about our family are impacted by foster care. And but it's a very personal, it's become very personal for me. And it's a whole lot different when I put up stats of saying, hey, 43% of kids are sent out of our community because we don't have homes for them. But then I get a call from our agency saying, hey, Mike, there's this 6-year-old little girl and she's about to be on a bus to El Paso. And if you don't take her, she's going to be separated from everything that she knows and going to be 550 miles away and 8.5 hours away. Is there any way you and Ariel can make this work? You've got one little spot for this girl. And we prayed about it, said yes, and welcomed her into our home. And she's still with us 19 and a half months later. And I've fallen in love with this girl, and I think about like, what would have happened if we just said no? Like what would have happened? And so now this, how does it frame how I talk about it? It's not just, 43%. It's, hey, this could have been her. This was going to be her. And so, it's just it's much more personal in nature.
And ultimately, even for this little girl that you have now, God didn't need you. He gave you an opportunity, right? Like with my kids I think that too. I 100% had a chance to say no, and I could have said no, and I would not have thwarted God's plans at all for that child. I would have thwarted them for my life and all the things that I would have learned. And probably you would say the same thing for yours. Like you could have said no.
Oh yeah. There's no here. Like where's no heroism here? I mean, this is, we could have, but we would have missed out.
Right. Yeah.
I was reading this morning about the story of Esther, and when Mordecai says to her, if you don't take advantage of this opportunity as queen to speak to the king, like don't think that relief and rescue isn't going to come from somewhere else. It will, but you have the chance to be the one to take advantage of your opportunity.
Right.
And I think that's true for all of us. Mm-hmm. Like everyone listening, everyone that, it was reminding me of like how incredibly fortunate we are, and we don't realize, like, right, being at like the top 8% or 1% of the most wealthy in the world, like the resources that we have, if we have a roof over our head, if like we're able to eat a meal, if we have health, like we can be the one to say yes or no.
Right.
But to your point, the Lord is going to take care of these kids.
Right.
He will. But he's inviting us
to be part
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, like it's not, for me, it hasn't just been like, what do I share from the stage, but one-on-one conversations. Like people see our family, and people see what's happening. They've fallen in love with these kids that are foster children. And what's been wild is the other day I was like thinking about all the different families that have stepped into this in our community. And it's been so truly unbelievable. I mean, it's been amazing. I think there's probably 10 families ish. And like I counted, we were over 35 kids that have been fostered or adopted in our tiny little podunk church plant, and so it's really become a part of our culture is like, hey, we care for vulnerable children. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a foster family. We have so many that have played other roles and really come alongside to support. But it's just been not just something we say from up front, but I mean, it bleeds out in everything we do.
Yeah. Yeah. So zooming out a little bit from your family, were there moments as a pastor and, even in your time here at San Antonio, where you realized that, like the church does care, the Big C church does care, they just don't know what to do?
Yeah. I don't think the problem is a lack of caring. I think there's a blindness to it. And the other thing too, to be truthful, and as a pastor, as somebody who's been a pastor for 19 years and is someone who knows a lot of pastors, they have a lot on their plates. I mean, there's so many things that are competing for them and their attention, and Sunday's coming, and they've got a lot of things going on. I mean, as a pastor, you're essentially your spiritual advisor, but you're also helping to run a business of a church, and everything comes across your desk, so to speak. And so these dudes are, and many of them are up to their eyeballs. They're not looking for other things to do. And so I want to just be very sensitive and gracious in how we talk about pastors. I love pastors. We honor them. We encourage them for the incredible work that they're doing in the city. And I don't think it's like that they don't care about kids. I've never like, hey, you don't care about, it's just, hey, when you're not confronted with it and you're not close to it and don't have a high level of proximity to it, it becomes something, out of sight, out of mind also.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things we see in scripture all the time. I remember studying a while back, but it was just talking about things don't get real till they get proximal, like they get close to you. And that's one of the things that we watched Jesus do throughout the scriptures was he got close to the broken. He got close to the man on the mat. He got close to the person at the well. Like he got close to them intentionally. And then their story became real. And we got to see how he would respond to these real people in real messes, really far from him oftentimes. And I think that's one of the challenges in Western America is that we can insulate ourselves from all uncomfortable, messy things. And so it creates a challenge for the church to even see it. And even once they see it, they're like, I don't even know what to do.
Yeah. And to your point about Jesus, I think one of the things that even this last year has been really convicted about in my study of him is Jesus was constantly willing to be interrupted. And we don't like interruption.
Mm-hmm. We don't have margin for it.
We feel like we don't have margin for it. And we try to do everything that we can to protect ourselves from interruption. We have do not disturb things on our phone. We have, all of these things that prevent us from being interrupted because, hey, this is my plan and this is my focus. But it is that, and there are some times where that can be a good thing where we need to focus on certain things. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but are we going to be willing to let ourselves be interrupted?
Because ultimately, I guess my question then is like, why? There's like, not to get like too harsh sounding, but like, what is the idol behind that? Is it productivity? Is it comfort? Is it convenience? I don't know, but there have to be things behind why we are so afraid of being interrupted. And as Americans and like in the West, we very much live in a culture that doesn't celebrate that, and if it's not efficient, if it's not productive, if it's not streamlined, or if it's not serving a purpose or my purpose, then I don't really have time for it. Even the idol of the family, not to like make people really uncomfortable, but like,
go for it.
Okay. Even your family, like, and your ideas for how it should look and be, and, your vision for your family, can itself, I guess, become an idol. So those would be the things that would like stand out to me as to like, why are we so uncomfortable with the idea of disruption and interruption?
And honestly, as you're talking, I think comfort's a huge part of it. I also think, and this is not going to be something most of us like to admit, but I also think that there's a fear.
Yeah.
And like, hey, if I do this, if I step out, if I encourage my people to engage in this, what's going to happen?
Well,
are their marriages going to survive?
You feel like you're opening Pandora's
You are opening Pandora's box 100%, and it can spiral. And I've point blank had pastors and leaders tell me, hey, this is pretty messy. I don't know that I want our people to get involved in it.
You know what the funny thing is, though? You and I have talked about this before, but they don't, as pastors, and this is just a way to frame it a little differently, is in America in general, there's almost 50% divorce rate, right? Kids go wayward, or we have prodigal children, even as Christians, because none of us are perfect. And yet we don't stop marrying people in the church, and we don't stop having children, even though we don't control any of that. And there's epic failures and horrible outcomes from both of those scenarios. Yet for some reason, it's like, well, we'll tolerate it in these two areas, but in that area, we can have a pass on that one.
And and I think too, kind of the same principle, what were you talking about? I hear a lot of pastors say, well, I feel weird talking about that because that's not something I've done personally. Sure. And I'm like, well, do you feel weird talking about overseas missions and that importance, and the importance of that and supporting and getting behind missionaries? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, it's the same thing. I mean, this may not be something you do individually as a family, but you can support families within your church, and you can recruit families to engage in this and support them well.
Yeah. So this kind of leads into the next question, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, but maybe dive in a little deeper. So once you, as in your pastoral role, once you realized that there was this gap, there was these kids in this valley, the nonprofits are kind of serving them, the state is kind of doing something, but neither one of them are adequate to help these kids heal and restore families. Once you realized that gap was real, what did that spark in you? What did that lead you as a pastor, as a father? Where did that lead you?
I mean, kind of like I said before, it started with me and with us, and with us as a married couple and as a family, saying, hey, what are we going to do? And what is God asking us to do personally? Mm-hmm. And then from there, it was saying, hey, like we need as many people to get involved in this as possible. And so and Jennifer, I mean, you're a big part of my story. I mean, when a buddy of mine that I went to college with didn't even know he was in San Antonio. When I moved here, he asked me if we could go grab lunch. He found out I was here, asked if I could go grab lunch. And I told him kind of the way that the Lord was shaping in my heart, its desire to care for vulnerable kids in foster care. And he's like, hey, do you know Jennifer Smith? And we sat down for lunch, and it was so freeing to be able to talk to somebody else that was like, hey, there's this huge gap going on in our city, and we need the church to engage. And so that's what we became kindred spirits, and right away, because It was like, no, hey, there is a tribe of people in our city that do care, that do understand, and we're going to work together to help challenge and encourage church leaders to engage in more of a deep way. And so, yeah, it became personal to the family. Also wanted to engage people within our church and encourage them to play their piece and ask the Holy Spirit to speak to them. But then, like, hey, let's recruit other church leaders to join the fight too.
Right. Because, yeah, do you feel like there's limits of what one church can carry? Like one church can't carry the torch on this.
100%. I mean, and what's wild is we get to learn about all the different churches and the way God's positioned them in different communities. And churches have incredible strengths and ways that they've been positioned, but they also have some deficiencies. And we have churches that are very financially stable and have a lot of great resources, but they're not really close to a lot of the problems that are really plaguing our city. And we have other churches that are really underserved financially and under-resourced, but they're on the ground, like getting after it. And so how do they work together? And that's just been such a blessing to see people come together and work together for lack of a better word, as an alliance.
Right. Because ultimately it's a unifying thing. Like, we are one church, one body, one family of God that are moved by one Holy Spirit, unified in carrying out the Great Commission, particularly this mission. And so I think it's been beautiful over the last several years of the Alliance, its existence in San Antonio, and, seeing what God's doing, really bringing the whole church together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Like, we all need each other to do this. And that's so glorifying to God, like a spirit of unity. So I love that part.
For sure.
So what still feels, I'm sure there's a lot, but maybe your top thing that feels most unresolved for you as a pastor in your pastoral role when it comes to foster care?
So I didn't know if I was going to tell this story or not, but a couple weeks ago, there was a young lady who aged out of foster care, and our family has connected with her, and we went downtown and went along the Riverwalk, and we were walking. She had no idea that I was a pastor. Had known Ariel, had connected with her, and so we went out to dinner, and then we were walking, and I just said, "Hey, do you mind telling me a little bit of your story?" And some of the things that she shared were so heavy and heartbreaking that she had been through. And she was promised by CPS that she was going to get adopted and that they were going to find a family for her. And she was told countless times, "Hey, you're going to be adopted. You're going to find a family." Her mother had died. She never knew her dad. And she said, not only did they not find a family here for me in San Antonio, there was actually no place for me to go. So I had to go spend a few years in Houston because there was no place for me here in this city. And that was just like a gut punch. And again, I've been in this space for 8 years, and this just happened to me 2 weeks ago. And so when you ask, like, what are the gaps? I mean, there still are kids that desperately need the people of God to care for them. And there are still so many children that we don't have in our city, or that we don't have space for in our city, and that they know that no family wants them. Meanwhile, we've got people at CPS saying, "Oh yeah, gee, you're going to get a family," and making these false promises to these kids. And I wish that there would be a line of families that they could have their family to choose from. Mm-hmm. And so when you ask, like, what are the gaps that you still see? I that's what I see. And my encouragement to myself and to every church leader and every believer in our city is, hey, please just don't let these be stats. May they become stories. And then when they become stories, let them become faces, and get to know these people, get close to them, have them into your home, have a meal with them, connect. And if you know a foster family, support them, take them out for coffee, ask if you can meet their foster kid, and let their story become personal, because I do believe that the Spirit of God will speak to you and will compel you and move you to get closer. And I don't know what that closer looks like for you. And I didn't know what that closer looked like for me. If you'd asked me, 9 years ago, hey, what is it going to look like for you to engage in foster care? I would have had no idea what God would have had in store. But we were willing, and we gave our yes, and the Lord really showed up.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That was Yeah, it's the stories that when you're out there close to this population, you hear all the time, and they're heartbreaking, and they're the ones that you want to share with everybody else in hopes that they too feel that burden and that weight. So what would you say to somebody who hears these stories? Maybe their heart breaks a little bit, but they're like, it's not my responsibility. I didn't hurt those kids. I didn't abandon those kids. Like, what, for the person that's sitting there thinking like, why do I take on this burden? Why do I take on this hard? I didn't cause it.
If that was Jesus's attitude towards me, I would be destined to hell. If Jesus said, "Hey, I didn't sin. Why? Like this, it's because of the gospel. It's because of Jesus. It's because of the good news of Jesus Christ that we preach about, that we follow. It's because of, ultimately, it's all because of Jesus. I don't know if that's like the cliche Sunday school, but it's really because of him. Like if that was his attitude towards me, man, oh man, I'd be sunk. And so it's, as Christians and as followers of Jesus, this is about him and how is his response. And his response is one of sacrifice and selflessness and prioritizing others and grace and mercy and love. And then also he's given us the Holy Spirit to be able to follow in his footsteps. And so that would be my...
So it's almost like we should be disciples.
It's almost like this is a discipleship. It's
So weird.
So weird, right?
for sure. But I don't know if you've seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, but there's a scene in it where this guy is who's Rwandan, and there's this crisis happening in his country, and there's genocide going on, and there's a reporter from the West, and he's there, and he's documenting all of this, and he says like, "Oh, we need to get this footage." They were Rwandan. It's like, we need to get this footage to everybody, because if they see it, then they're going to do something, and everybody's gonna see it. And he said, their response is going to be, they're going to see this commercial or this come across on their television, and they're going to say, "My gosh, that's horrible." And they're going to change the channel and go on eating their dinners. And I feel like that sometimes can be our response to the foster crisis. My gosh, that's horrible that these kids don't have families. My gosh, that's terrible. And I think our job as pastors and shepherds and leaders is to say, yeah, it is horrible and it is terrible, but let's not change the channel. Let's not keep going on eating our dinners. Let's actually engage and do something and give our people a pathway, because ultimately I think sometimes if we create awareness without giving them a pathway, we may even be doing more harm.
Right.
And
Almost
creating this desensitization.
Yeah.
to it.
Inoculating them.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you wouldn't say that everyone should foster.
100% no. Absolutely not. Matter of fact, if people come and talk to me about it, I talk them out of it. I've probably talked more people out of foster care, and I don't really think I've ever talked anybody into it. You know, I don't think everybody should foster. I don't think everybody is I think everybody's I think the word calling can get misconstrued and misconceived. And
We could do another episode on that.
we can do another
Okay.
episode on that. But I think ultimately our job as obedient disciples of Jesus is to care for the most vulnerable. But I do not think that that's always manifested or should be manifested in being a foster family. And we don't need everybody to foster. There aren't, if every Christian and Christian family in our country fostered, we wouldn't have enough
Right.
kids for all the families. So we don't need everybody to, but everybody should engage. And we're not all going to do the same thing, but everybody could do something. And I believe is commanded to do something.
Right.
But we do need more people to foster. I just don't want it to seem like we don't need foster families, because we do. And even if it sounds really scary, like God is big enough to handle it.
Right.
So
And
I just don't want that to be like
with that,
I don't know.
with that being said, I think that we should also, as believers, assume that this is not about the lowest bar of obedience. That we should assume that maybe if God wants me to be a father to the fatherless, maybe I am supposed to actually be a father to a kid that doesn't have one. Not just, send a shoebox overseas and that's the way that I'm going to do it and help somebody else. Maybe that is going to be my role in this season. But I think we should assume that, man, if these kids don't have homes, I am called to open my home for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What if we started there as the bar?
Right.
And then
Yeah, let God close the door. You don't need to be the one to close it for him.
Right. And in the last episode, they heard Jocelyn's story, which you guys know well. And a lot of what she was talking about was, that in obedience, like, you heard from the Lord, you felt called, however you want to frame it, you stepped in obedience. It didn't get tied up in a little cute bow. Like, it wasn't because you're like, I think also as Westerners, we are like, okay, I said yes, that means the rest of this should be easy.
Yeah.
And even in y'all's story, in our story, in Jocelyn's story, there will be unresolved things until Jesus comes back.
Yeah. I get asked to speak about this a lot, which I'm so grateful for. And one of the times I was about to speak at this big conference, I get a phone call, and it was the dean of students at my school saying that my son was suspended from school because he just flipped out and he completely lost it. And we had him adopted for over 6 years at this point. And, I'm going around speaking, talking about why this is a good idea to follow Jesus and care for the most vulnerable. And I'm still like, I had to call a friend to go pick him up and put the child locks on their van because he was going postal. So like, this is not just that, oh yeah, like everything ends well and la, la, la. But it's like, hey, Jesus, I know this is your heart and I'm going to trust you today. I'm going to have to trust you tomorrow. Maybe even more than I'm going to have to trust you today.
Right. And that's one of the things they heard last week with Jocelyn was that it's a manna for today. It's a grace for today. It's a mercy for today. It's a patience for today. Yesterday may have been whatever it was and a epic failure. But the only thing you can steward really is today. And you can rely on the Lord and you can pursue righteousness and you can try to steward these kids in the way of the Lord and do your best and not run down rabbit trails of like where you think this what is happening today will lead to this child or your family in 10, 15, 20 years, because ultimately no control. And I think that just continues to be the thread that comes out of these stories is our death grip on control is, I think, one of the hugest things that keeps us from being willing to step into hard and messy places with broken people.
And if the goal is for us to relinquish control, I don't know of a better vehicle to be able to do that than foster care.
I agree. I totally agree. I tell that in my story also. Well, Mike, is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to share before we pivot to your beautiful wife?
Just that, man, I love the church and believe that the Spirit of God is working in his people. And far be it from me to ever be or sound critical. I know that I've got, as somebody who's a part of the church, I've got a lot of issues myself, and I know that we're not perfect. But man, the Spirit of God is moving in his people and is drawing us to the heart of Jesus. And I genuinely am encouraged and excited. And I think sometimes we can talk about these gaps and there's a lot of work to do and we can be discouraged, but man, the Lord is moving. And I do believe that there is a better day to come. And I do believe the people of God are awakening, and I'm praying for a continued revival in his people. And that a byproduct of that would be that, man, every kid in our city who needs a home has a Jesus home. And so I'm very hopeful. I'm encouraged. I mean, sometimes I know I can get excited and passionate and even emotional and be a hot mess. But I'm really grateful for the way that God is using his people. And there's a unity happening here that is powerful and so encouraging. So I'm just very grateful.
Well, Mike, thank you for so vulnerably sharing, for your leadership in this space, and for your willingness just to lead from the front and lead from your couch and do the hard, messy, but transparent, real work of fostering and pastoring. Well, thanks for being here today.
I'm humbled to be a part of it, for sure. Thank you.